So, hello everybody. Welcome back to my interview series. Today we've got Mr. Paddy Fanning on. Paddy is a well-known sheepdog handler from Glenealy, County Wicklow in Ireland. Paddy is a sheep farmer on a lowland and on a hill farm where he keeps Cheviot and black-faced sheep. Paddy has represented the Irish team multiple times and was in last year's World Final. Paddy runs an online training platform called Churchmount Sheepdogs, and he also does clinics around the world with his aim to help handlers improve their knowledge and handling ability. How are you? How are you this morning, Paddy? Are you all right?
Real good. To get a few things sorted out there before I sat down, but I think I'm good and organised now.
Yeah, well, the first question I want to ask is it's quite a simple one, but it's not as when I ask it to people, it's not as easy as it sounds. What I want to ask is why, in terms of we can do anything with our lives, but we've chosen to keep and run sheepdogs. So take me back to the beginning. How did it all start, and why have you chosen this as a option to pursue in your life?
Yeah. Well, Robin, how long have you got? Um, uh, you'll have to try and keep me short here on a few things because I tend to talk a lot. But yeah, why? It's a good question to start with because why comes into everything so much. It comes into when we're training dogs. It comes into how we handle sheep. It comes into everything. But why? I never thought I was going to get into sheepdogs. Um, I tell you what I was doing. I was working out in Canada, and I was out there for a couple of years. Sort of breaking horses, and then bringing laundry around out in the Rockies, and food, and sometimes people and that kind of thing. And it was lovely work. I used to look forward to getting up in the morning. It was just a dream job, really. But I used to drink an awful lot back then, and and that's why I was in Canada. I was in a little bit of trouble in Ireland, so I snuck off to Canada for a couple of years. The trouble died down a little bit, but I won't get into all that. It was good entertainment, and no big harm came out of it for anybody. But not the kind of stuff you'd get away with doing now. But so anyway, I was out in Canada, and I knew I had a little bit of trouble with the drinking. And when I came back, I was out there a couple of times. So when I came back the last time, shortly after that, I decided to do something about the drinking. And I suppose I was probably only about 23, probably turning 24, and I stopped drinking. And so when I stopped, I had no job. And to tell you the truth, I was sort of unemployable. Uh, but so I started working with my dad, and my dad was a farmer, and traditionally he'd been a tillage farmer. He'd done some other things as well, but mainly tillage, and he'd kind of shifted over into cattle and then into sheep. And so when I came back from Canada, we had a lot of sheep. Like he probably had maybe 900 or 1,000 ewes that time. And so uh, I was kind of a difficult fellow. I was a bit contrary. But what happened when I was a few years earlier, I had bought this book. Well, I'll show you this book. I have it here. See, can you see that? Way of Life by Lynn Jones. And I bought it because I liked this picture on the front. I suppose I had a little kind of a idea in the back of my head. Oh, it'd be nice to train a sheepdog and all. But when I came back from Canada and I started working with my dad, I was buying and selling a few sheep, and I got my first sheepdog. Actually, I sold a fella a couple of bullocks, and they weren't very good ones. I didn't get much profit, but he gave me a pup, and he was a fella in the Glenmore Hotel, and he gave me this pup that was just running around. And so that was my first one. And shortly after that, I got another one then on a sheep deal. A fella threw in a pup for luck. And so they were my first two dogs. And so I started using Lynn's book to train these. And I was thinking, wouldn't it really be something now if I could get the dog to go 50 or 80 yards and go and collect a packet of maybe 50 sheep or something and bring them back to me? Wouldn't that be just amazing? And so I was using Lynn's book, and gradually this stuff started to happen with my two dogs. The two of them started working, and well, when I looked in his book, and as it went on, you could see the bit about teaching a dog its right and left and all this kind of stuff, and how to drive. And I thought that was all too advanced for me. But as time went on, I started to do more of this stuff in the book, and I was doing a lot of dealing sheep really with my dad, and that we'd be selling a lot of lambs, and he'd be in and out of marts all the time. And now I was kind of getting that I could do a lot of stuff with my dogs. Sometimes there'd be a big queue of jeeps and trailers into the mart, and see, I was kind of young, and Ireland is kind of one thing I like about being Irish is we kind of have mightn't have it as much now. We used to have a kind of a healthy disrespect for the law. So when I drive into the mart and there'd be a heap of jeeps and trailers now in front of me, I just let my sheep out in the car park. And when somebody pull out, I'd slip mine in using the dog. And then I'd move them around through the marts and all with my dogs. And all. So my dogs were getting fierce education. And like, why did I get into dogs? At that time, it was the only real job I could get. And I wasn't really right in the head. I was a little bit mad. I was very hot tempered, still a small bit hot tempered, but that time I was very difficult. Nobody could work with me, but these two dogs could work with me. And and what happened was they got better and better, and they were able to tolerate me, because I'd expect you to be a mind reader, and then I'd be given out to you if you didn't know what I was planning to do next. And sure, how would you know? But these two dogs were amazing because they put up with all that, and they just had such a desire to work. And so what happened then, I was able to do all the work on my farm, on my dad's farm, by myself. He had a couple of lads working for him and all. It was a fairly big place, but I was able to do all the sheep work on my own. So I could bring in 1,000 ewes, or, in the summer, I don't know, maybe it'd be 13 or 1,400 lambs as well. And so it'd be big volume work. And with that, he wasn't much of a sheep man. He wasn't much good at reading stock or anything, but somehow he had a super sort of a setup where sheep really flowed around, and like I could dip sheep there on my own and dose them on my own. And he had a really good setup. But our sheep numbers then, in the next couple of years, they started to go up, and I started to get a flock of my own. And between my dad and myself, one year we had 1,800 ewes. And that year, we lamb in all the twins and some of the singles and all. But that year, the shed burnt down. He had a massive big shed, and he had a lot of hay in it. And my dad was always tricking around welding and doing stuff like that. And he was a kind of, well, anyway, he was a tricky sort of fella. But I have a feeling he was welding or doing something one day, and a bit of a spark got into the hay, because the hay all burnt and the shed burnt and everything burnt. And so now we were left with 1,800 ewes, and like that, we probably had, 200 or 300 dry hoggets as well, we call them here. And so we had a big number of sheep and no shed lamb in. And so I had hooked up with a guy called Norman Deacon early in play. And so it fell to me and Norman Deacon to lamb all these ewes outside. And so I was probably about 24 at that time. So we're doing a massive volume of work, myself and Norman, with quads and trailers and probably 7 dogs maybe, And so that's how I got into it all. But what happened to me was, after a few years of that, I realized there's not a lot of money in farming. And so, I had a chat to my dad, and he said, Paddy, in all my life farming, I probably only ever made money out of it 2 years. And he said, if you could find anything else to do, you'd be better. So after that, it was around the time of foot and mouth, and I started to get out of sheep farming and get into other stuff then.
Well, that's it. Yeah, aren't we so lucky that our dogs don't see the faults in us as much as we do? I just want to go back. You mentioned at the beginning about breaking in horses in Canada. And I find any sort of horse training fascinating, as well as any sort of animal training, really. Did you use any of your experience breaking horses to start training dogs? Do you feel like, is there a way to, once you figured out how to train one animal, there's certain characteristics that helps you train others? Did you sort of see a connection there?
Well, Robin, that's a very good question. So my whole foundation, my whole philosophy when it comes to training sheepdogs is based on a horse trainer's ideas. So when I was in Canada, I worked for some super bosses and all, but I worked for one fella who was, well, he wasn't the greatest fella. But he did me 2 favors. One thing, and I was only telling my brother about it yesterday. One thing he told me, he said, Paddy, when you're breaking a horse or you're doing something there, don't ever take a shortcut unless you know exactly what you're doing, because it'll just come back to bite you. And he wasn't a great fella, but that's one thing I'm always grateful for telling me that. And so I suppose the point is, sometimes people you don't like can really help you. I can give you another example of that later. But so that was that guy. But he had some books, right? And he used to talk a lot of rubbish too, but he had some books, but he had this one little book, and it wasn't an inch thick, half an inch, quarter of an inch thick. And it was by a horseman called Ray Hunt. And so Ray Hunt, that little book and Ray Hunt's ideas formed my whole philosophy. He was the keystone really in how I thought about everything to do with training or handling dogs or horses. And so Ray's thing, if you just boil it all down, Ray's thing is really just make the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard. And so we make the right thing easy, for trying to open the dog's outrun, for example, and he starts to cut in, well, we stop him. or I stop him. And then I give him the opportunity again, say, would you like to open this time? And maybe he will. And if he does, well, that's the right thing. It's easy. I'll allow him to continue. But if he doesn't, I'll start to make the wrong choices harder and less attractive to him. And so that's all coming from Ray Hunt.
Oh, yeah, that's very, very interesting. So in terms of your training sort of principles, before sort of, do you have any sort of general sort of ideas about how you'd like to train dogs, what you do with your dogs? I just want to kind of get an understanding really of how you sort of operate. Do you have any sort of core principles when you're training dogs, which goes for any sort of dog, any sort of style that you train?
Well, yeah, we all like different sort of dogs. And so I could tell you this is a good dog, and you'd say, no, this one here is a good dog. And so like I think about that, and really I think it comes down to our values, what our values are. So all my dogs fit with my values. When I met my wife, and 3 weeks later I almost proposed to her. And I said, Paddy, don't be impulsive now, hold on there, be sensible here. So I waited for another 3 weeks. So after meeting her as a stranger, 6 weeks later I was engaged to her. 6 months later we were married. And I often joke that, I knew she was the right one because she had all the qualities of my best dogs. But it's a joke, but at the same time, it just comes down to my values. So, she had all the important criteria that fit with my values. And so the things like that are, like if I have a dog and I let out sheep in the middle of Dublin, well, I want a fella that'll stick in there with me and get them out. And, if there's cars or people or, if there's something unpleasant, that he doesn't give up, that he sticks in there with me and we get it done. And so that's the same thing that I'm looking for on the mountain. And then obviously it's the same thing I'm looking for in a wife. I often joke that, if I lost all my money or I got sick or, at least I could depend on her to be there. And so that's what I want in a dog too. So really that comes down to my values. And then when I'm selecting dogs now, I'm looking for, I'll always talk about this, but I'm looking for three things primarily. And they don't have to be full there's no, like if it was 0 out of 10 of a scale, well, they don't all have to be 10. In these three things, but they all have to have a certain amount of them for me to be comfortable with them. And so the first one is they have to have a certain degree of power. Now, I know people have different, they have different, I don't know what the word is, they have different ideas of what power is. But for me, power is that when we're stuck, that we get unstuck and that we're not going to get stuck. And so that's power for me. So then the next thing I want is balance. I love balance. You need that bit of balance and class and maybe some people call it feel, and they're not wrong there either. That bit of balance and feel so say I'm at a pen, my Bruce dog is brilliant for it. Maybe, I'm penning the sheep, you know what it's like, Robin, and one decides to break, but we haven't spotted it. But the dog he makes a little move and covers it for you, and you're kind of saying, oh yeah, thank you, Mr. Dog. I didn't see that there, but thanks for making me look good. And so that's balance. That I want that in a dog. I must have that. I don't want to have a robot that I have to tell him after the fact because I'll be too slow to see it. I need him to see it before me and probably to act. And so same with shedding, same with a lot of those things. I need that balance. Like we get out a single, we don't know where to tell the dog to be if that single decides to break back. We need a dog that can figure that out himself. So that's the second thing I need. And then the other thing I need, and it's because I'm probably because like years ago, when I'm saying we lambed out 1,800 yaws, well, that year we probably had 3,500 sheep on the farm. Maybe we had 4,000. I don't know. We had big volume of stuff. And so like I could dip 2,000 yaws on my own in 2 days with no help. Dogs, of course, but no help otherwise. And so that's why the third thing is stamina. You need to have lots of stamina. I don't want to be out on the side of a hill and nearly have my 2 sheep home or down to the valley or whatever. Next thing my dog is out of steam and we have to let him go. Now I have a new job. I have to go back another day to get him. Or maybe we're in the national and we've got a real bloody good run up and we're in the shedding ring and it's hot. And now my dog is starting to fade a bit. And sure, he's working and from the outside, he looks like he's doing all the stuff. But I know he's just a little bit late. And then we get to the pen and now he's a little bit late. And now we don't get penned and now we're out of time. All because we hadn't got stamina. So I'd rather, some people might say, oh, Paddy, you're a bit ruthless now, but it's just too hurtful for me to go against my values. I can't do it. We probably none of us can. So I take the pain early. And if I see them lacking a bit in those 3 areas, I'm not satisfied with it, I'll move it on to somebody else because it might fit their values fine.
Okay, so how do you go about picking a dog or training a dog that has all three values? Do you breed your own dogs? Do you have a sort of a breeding line that you always go to, or are you on to buy dogs, buy pups? What's the first step of getting a dog that fits all three of your values?
Well, I'll give you an example. So when I started dogs, I think it was 97. And in 2000 was the foot and mouth. I was gone again then. But in that international in 2000, whatever it was before the foot and mouth, Armouth weight, there's 60 dogs in the singles there in the international. Three of them were dogs I had trained. And of those three dogs, three of them were somebody else's rejects. And it's not a credit. It's like I said, it didn't fit their values, so they moved them on. So those dogs, for example, one of them, I sold it to a guy. I just started lambing and I was singling out jaws and I sold to a guy. And 2 months later, he wasn't getting on well. And I called him. I heard, that the bitch was no good and this and that. And I was thinking she's too good for that, for people to be saying that about her. And it sort of annoyed me for the dog, like. And so I called him and he said she must have killed sheep and she was singling them out. And I was thinking, sure, that's what we're doing, lambing, just to untrain it. But I didn't tell him that. So I bought her back. And I took her to a trial a few weeks later. And within about a month, there was three people trying to buy her. And a couple of months after that, Butch Morgan bought her from me. And I think he bought her over the phone or he bought her on Pat Murphy's recommendation or something. And Jeff Evans was over and Jeff collected the bitch. And the following year, he was on the Welsh team with her. And the following year, he was in I think it was 2002, he was in the Supreme with her. So you can see how the tool, if we describe her as a tool, in different hands, she was a whole different article. She was capable of going, up to Supreme level. So, and the same was those other dogs. One of them was, I bought him for £100, and I liked him real well. And my buddy Norman said, Paddy, he said, don't sell that dog. He'll get you in the national. And I was saying, oh, really? Is he that good? Yeah. And he was real tight and all, but we opened him up. And then a famous handler here, Pat Byrne from Kildare, he won international doubles and different things. He bought this, Buddy Ben was the dog's name. He bought Buddy from me. And Pat thought he was going to win the Supreme with him. He really loved the dog. But he was on the Irish team 5 times with him. So, he wasn't that far off the mark. And in fairness to Pat, he was capable of that kind of level of trialing. But so there's a dog that I bought for £100 that nobody wanted. It was full of faults. And when we cleaned him up, well, then he was like top level stuff. So, and then the other one was one of my own. I had him on the team myself. We very nearly won our first national. Just that's look at a draw, but it was the dog helping me, and the dog had that thing that I'm talking about with the balance. It was difficult sheep. It was up in the north of Ireland on Lanarks, and really I had nothing to do. And he slowed the dog down because he could weigh it up and balance it all up. He just made it very easy. He made me look good. I wasn't that good.
Yeah, it's certain aspects in dogs. I suppose there's certain things that you can train out, but to have the top qualities, there's certain things you can't give them. So if you see a dog that has that naturally, then I suppose you're already halfway there. I just want
to
interrupt
you. Just let me interrupt you for a second. I'm not sure if I even answered your last question properly, but one thing we need to be able to do, and it's real simple. So if I tell my dog to go right or to go left, I need him to do that. And I need him to do it where he's not tight and he's in contact and he's not out of contact. Now, every handler has a slightly different style of how they like to work a dog. But I need him that if I tell him those right or left, that's what it needs to be. It needs to be now when I give the command, and it needs to be the right distance. And you could break it out more. With one dog, I'd do it where you try to slow down his flanks and make him walk his flanks and all. That's a different thing. But so long as he'll do those flanks at the right width, and then he'll stop when I tell him to stop, and then he'll go when I tell him to go, and then he'll come back when I tell him to come back. So if he can do all those kind of things, well, now we can compete. But every Sunday we go, and I'll be there with green dogs too, and or maybe I haven't been schooling my dogs and they're a little bit rusty. And so they'll give a tight flank or they'll tighten on me at the pen or something and screw up a pen. And, there's so many of these things. Hold on, so many of these things. But if our dog is working correctly, well, then we can compete. And even when we can compete, things will go wrong. You're not going to win every week. But if you get good sheep and your dog is working correctly, well, now you're at the races. And so often I see people with, maybe you've got a sticky dog. Now you say get up, but he doesn't get up when you need to. Now maybe the sheep start to feel brave. Maybe they come back and challenge the dog a little bit. And now I saw this last weekend in the trial I was judging there. And now you see, you give him too much time to think, but it's because the dog didn't come forward when you asked him, or didn't come forward positively. And like that, you give him a flank and maybe he just goes the wrong way for a second. Those little things, you can't afford those. So if I have a dog that I see that's a little bit sticky earlier on, I'd probably move him on, because I'm looking further down the line, and I'd say, I don't have to handle around this. It's hard enough to win anyway.
Yeah, definitely. So sort of the characteristics you were describing, power, balance, stamina, those are definitely three words that you'd associate with sort of top farm dogs. That's something that, that's important sort of out in the field. Would you say that you train dogs to be farm dogs first and then trying to find sort of qualities for a trial? Or do you expect a dog you train to be able to do both? How do you balance, or do you think there's a difference? Kind of good farm dog be a good trial dog? How do you sort of balance those two dilemmas?
Well, all those dogs that I was talking about were in the team years ago. They were all good farm dogs. And there's my Bruce dog. He's been in the team a couple of times. Yeah, he put up like one of the highest all-time scores in Irish National. And yet, he's a super dog on the hill. It's like he's got a GPS when you send him for sheep, or you can pull him in or steer him out. Now, he's inclined to be tight. So at the start of every summer, before I start trialing, I have to open him up a little bit on his flanks. But really, so he makes me look better than I am. But yet, he's still a farm dog. So he'll work cattle. I don't work cattle very much because they're too valuable to be at that, and I don't have cattle. But he'll work rams. He's not going to get bettered by a ram, and he'll work yo's lambs. So he do all those jobs, any farm job I want to do, and any hill job I want to do. So he's just a real complete dog. But then I have a dog there called Bert, and I like Bert real well. But Bert is just lacking that extra little bit of class that he needs for trials, and so he has balance. And that's why balance and feel, I think, are a little different. He has lovely balance, a really nice dog to hold sheep on a line, driving away and all. But he just overcooks it. He comes into that, I think, bubble, as Alad calls it, and he's no regard for it. And so he's missing that little bit of feel. And that little bit of feel, you need that to help you at trials, So back to your question, yes, of course, you can have a strong farm dog who can be a top-class competition dog. And he's probably better in that really top-class stuff. The last World Trial, the sheep were quite good. But if they were a little bit more difficult, that's when you need a little bit more farm dog. And, it might have caught out some other dogs if they had been a little bit trickier. But we definitely need that bit of class for shedding and penning and little things where you just need the dog to do little movements and little almost intuitive things, and then they just help you. Whereas the dogs that don't have that, well, you're not going to get up. You might win some opens, but that's kind of, you might get lucky at the national, but that's what it'll be, is luck.
Well, sort of what many people might sort of know you for is you've done many interviews now with sort of the best handlers around the world. And I just want to ask you about that. How important do you feel is learning from others? How much information can you get out of talking to a top handler? And has that helped yourself to achieve success at the highest level?
Sometimes I've heard people say sometimes, oh, the top hats never tell you anything. And I often think, well, if they're not telling you anything, you're probably not worthy of being told anything. You've probably asked a question and they've said something and you've said, I know, or something like that. I know, like I've heard them all. And so I find, if we say the top hats, my experience, to tell me anything I've ever asked them, and if they're able to explain it to me, they're able to explain it. If I'm able to grasp and understand it, my thinking mightn't be at that level yet for the thing they're trying to explain to me. But I always find people real helpful when you go listening and you're hungry and you want to learn something. The odd fella might kind of send you in the wrong direction a bit, but it's very rare in my experience. So what do I think? Well, I think so when I stopped sheep farming, I did all kinds of things, plastered houses, and then I was doing this job in the QS. Said, hey, Paddy, my brother is building a house. He needs a stairs and oak stairs. Do you make him stairs? I said, oh, yeah. And so I called a buddy of mine and said, Des, you used to make stairs. Are they hard? And he said, no, stairs are easy. I said, would I be able to make stairs? He said, of course you would. and oak stairs. Now I had a bit of woodworking machinery, planers and saws and stuff, but so I started making these stairs and I got stuck. He gave me like a little template. He said, just use that and you can make it. And so I got stuck on it. And so I called another joiner fella who didn't really know. And I said, I'm in the middle of making the stairs here and it's not going so well for me. And he said, oh, stairs are difficult. Oh, Jesus, you're not going to be able to make that. And so I was thinking, well, I didn't like that answer very well. So I called another buddy of mine. He said, ask Chris Kavanagh. Chris, go and talk to Chris. So I called Chris anyway. And he said, come down here. So I called into his workshop. And I said, I'm a bit stuck here. And he said, oh, this is all you do. You just get out the newel post and just put that on the end there and just make a tenon. And I said, oh, yeah, that. He said, tell you what, he said, put your stairs in the van and bring it down here tomorrow and we'll finish it here tomorrow. And that's what we did. And then I went off and fit the stairs. And so that's then, oh, yeah, I'll tell you this quickly. So I went to this girl I know invited me to her wedding. So I went to the wedding, but her husband was making kitchens and furniture for offices and all that kind of stuff. And about 3 weeks after the wedding, they were back from the honeymoon and all. I got stuck on this. I got some job to do, and the fella had let me down to do it, making some kind of bookcase or something. And so I called my buddy, and he said to me, Ken, or well, he wasn't my buddy then, I didn't know him. Ken said, what are you doing making stairs and all? Make kitchens. He said, kitchens are easy. He said, we could put a kitchen on a pallet here in 45 minutes. Make kitchens. So I started making kitchens then, but they weren't easy, but they got easy. But so I like to hang around with fellas who take difficult things and consider them easy. And so it's the very same thing when I got into dogs is, I went and I hooked up with my old buddy Norman Deacon. He had 40 years of experience that he downloaded as much as he could into me. And we were luckily I tied up with him because we had the same values, like I mentioned earlier, with the same priorities. And so he was the guy who was helping me on those big numbers and all. So he knew how to get through that kind of stuff. And he had dogs that could get through it. And so it's the very same, the stairs, the kitchens, the dogs. I just now, if I want to know something, I just go and find the best fella I can afford. If it's a lawyer or a dentist, I go and find the best fella I can afford and get him, because one thing I find really frustrates me, and I can get irritated. You might even see me complaining on Facebook sometimes. I really hate misinformation. I think misinformation is it's an insult to people. But then you have to be careful not to allow yourself to pick up misinformation and to run with it. So that's why I go to the best people I know, ask them. And so there was my old buddy Norman, and then I stopped out of dogs. I gave up dogs for years there. And I came back to him probably about 2016. I'm probably about 10 years training dogs only, but even though I'm an old fella. But I came back to dogs and I said, I need to get a new coach. I said, who will I get? So I was reading an article that Sue Main had put up. It was an interview with Gwyn McNaught. And I was reading and I was saying, oh, I love the stuff this fella's saying. This fits with my values. I love this. So I called Sue, or I called Gwyn, I can't remember, and I went over to see him, and then we spoke a lot on the phone, and I'd slip over to him, every few months and that. And he told me so much stuff, and there was stuff I might ask him today. I might ask him again in a month, the same question, but it might take a few months for it to get into my understanding. And I know how I learn now. I learn by talking and discussing stuff with people, and then I started to see it. Gwyn is probably the one who really got me seeing clean flanks and seeing when flanks weren't clean. He kind of cleared all that up for me. So I know this is a bit long-winded. So then anyway, Kerry asked me to do those interviews that time. I started making podcasts like you're doing now, but there were audio ones back around 2017. And this is the thing, actually, Robin, and I see Alan Porter's making some now. This is the thing that I really, when I talk about my values and all, I enjoy this. I enjoy seeing you putting yourself out there, because it's not easy. Because I remember in 2017, nobody was making podcasts, and I started with them, and I was thinking, I want to make this podcast, put it up on Facebook, and people start picking at the person who's spoken to me and given me all this information and been so open about it. I was afraid about that. And then I was afraid, obviously, to be a bit of negative flack for me, and it's the same for you. Now you're doing this, you've stuck your head up above the parapet. It's easy to say, yeah, I didn't really like what Robin was saying there. And yeah, that Paddy fella, he wasn't that good. He was talking a lot of rubbish and all. And so everybody takes a little bit of a chance. So I love to see that. It's one of the things I love, when somebody extends themselves a little bit. So well done now with all this. And so anyway, back to the Kerry asked me if I wanted to do a few of those handler interviews for Away with Dogs, and then end up doing them all. And thank you, Kerry, that was great. But imagine how good it was for me to have access to all these top fellas to talk to them and all. But the one thing that came out in all the interviews, be asking Kevin or Alan or everybody in there, how do you learn? How do you improve? What's the key? And they all said, I didn't really like the answer because I like to talk. They said we learn by watching. We learn by watching the other handlers, and they'd mention different names and fellas they looked up to, and they'd learn little tricks from that. But it's taken me a couple of years, but I see now that that's how I'm learning too, you know.
Yeah, it's a job, because I've been very fortunate really as a young handler. Lot of good handlers around me in North Wales, and they've given me a lot of time. I remember I've been to Aled Owens once for an hour or two with my sort of younger dogs. And what I found was what he was saying, I could see that it was right, but it takes time to understand. You could go to a handler and he could tell you why he's doing something, why he's pushing them out. But it's not as easy for you to understand, for you to recreate with your dogs. It takes a sort of a high level of sort of understanding, which doesn't come from sort of an hour conversation or an hour. You have to develop that yourself. Yeah, as you mentioned, doing this, I'll sort of secret to sort of the viewers. The reason I'm doing this is to have the opportunity to speak to people, like yourself, because that's how we learn. That we learn from listening, we learn from learning, and sort of the benefit of sort of internet and sort of online stuff. There's so much sort of out there now for people to sort of read and listen. Because I'm not a big reader. I wouldn't like to sort of look in the book, but to be able to watch sort of and listen to people's up my street. So whilst we're on that topic, mentioned at the beginning that you do Church Mount, which is sort of online videos that people can watch, and you do clinics. How important do you feel that sort of there is information that people can access online, and sort of what's your role you see in making those videos? Do you sort of feel a sense of pride that you can sort of put things out there and hopefully help people learn?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I ever feel a sense of pride. That's a good question. I'll have to think about that after this. I don't know. Do I ever feel pride? Like when I was in the world final and I had my chance to win it and all, the sheep were real consistent. Everybody had a good chance. My dog was trained to do all those things I'm talking about. He was doing them all pretty correctly. And so I made a few handler errors that cost me the world trial, and cost all the other people. I'm sure that didn't win either. It cost them it same way. But the day after the world trial, it's like nothing. It's like it's a funny thing. I was thinking about all the people that didn't make it through the qualifying. Lots of good handlers didn't make it for one reason or another. Let's look at a draw. If we had the world trial again tomorrow, we'd probably have a different winner. And but. So I'm just thinking about the pride thing. It felt like nothing the next day, even though I'd been in the world final, and it must have felt an awful lot better than it felt for everybody else who wasn't in the world final or who didn't make it into the semis. Obviously, it felt a lot better. Like Sheepdog trial it's tough business. Serge van der Steep said a good one to me. We're standing outside or whatever, and he said, "You know what?" He said, "Like there's 240 dogs here in the world trial," and he said, one or two people will go home happy. And I often think about it. I think it's fierce funny. So pride, I don't know, do I ever feel pride? But I'm sure I do. I'm sure I do. Sometimes I wonder, do I ever feel happy? But when I make videos, see, it's like you there, right? So you're making the podcasts, and so you're putting out all this good information. You're giving people access to it, and so that's how I started making the podcasts initially. I was talking to all these people anyway, and I was thinking, well, if I was over in the back of Texas, or I was down in the bottom of Australia, or I was in Iceland or somewhere, wouldn't I like to be having a chat with Aladon or with Serge or with whoever? And so that was sort of my motivation for doing it, because I'm talking to him anyway. And so you're talking to him anyway. It's the same thing, but it's nice to give other people access. Because I remember when I came into Dogs First, and it was only me and Norman. Like there was nobody else to talk to. There's no point in telling me brother about how good the dog trial was. He didn't care about dogs. My brother's a kind of a bee fella. He'd talk about bees. So like that, we're a very small pool of sheepdog handlers and trialists and all. And really, Facebook is our little meeting place now, or I don't know, WhatsApp and all these other things. Like I'm doing those training videos on Patreon. We have a few little places where we can all meet up, and that's our club. But years ago, I didn't have that club, and so it's all bottled up. And so that was my motivation for making them initially. But the training things, a buddy of mine said to me, he's Paddy, you should do some training on Patreon. And there was nobody doing anything on Patreon that time. And so, like, same story, sticking your head above the parapet. And I said, oh, I'm not doing that. But he worked on me for a couple of months. And then I had this dog that I bought for 400. And I said, here, sure, I'm going to train him anyway. Well, and plus, I'm lazy. I need to kind of leverage myself into stuff. So I was thinking, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll train this fella up and put him into Skipton, but I'll do it online on Patreon. And so, I'll get the spotlight on myself. I'll put the pressure on myself that I have to train him now. And I remember around January time, he was starting to break down a little bit. We had a couple of weeks there. I was thinking, this fella's having a mental breakdown. Is he going to come through it? This is going to be very embarrassing because I've been talking about this on Facebook, and I've got my money on the line here, putting my money where my mouth is. And but fortunately, the dog came through it, and so we got a lot of good videos out of that dog because he started with a few problems. He was a bit tight, and we just took him all the way up to actually selling in Skipton, and I don't know, I think I got 4,000 for him or something. So I was turning 400 into 4,000. But he was kind of a nice dog. But back to what we said earlier, he wouldn't just fit all my criteria for little reasons. Good stamina or whatever else. But he was a real nice dog for somebody else. So that's how I got going on the Patreon thing. And I use it a little bit selfishly to make myself train the dog and, get him over the line. But I remember when I set up the Patreon thing, and I put up the first few videos trying to promote it a little bit, like I didn't want to be talking to myself. And I got a good few comments on there saying, sell the dog now there before you screw him up, and a couple of kind of big name handlers putting smiley emojis on it and all. And I was thinking, well, what was I thinking? When I saw those little negative things and all, I was thinking, I'm not afraid to put my money where my mouth is, but you might be, but I'm not. And I'm going to walk the talk here. So they kind of helped me, but it's tough to break up through that. And so a lot of people, they go up and they hit the first little bit of resistance and then they'll go back down. And it's the very same with anything we try to do in business or anything else, or sheepdog trials, and you're trying to get up and you're trying to get up. Like, it's tough. Sheepdog trials is tough because when it goes wrong, which it mostly will, because that's kind of the law of averages, you've got to go home in the car and talk to yourself. And I think we have to be very careful what conversations we have with ourselves on the way home in the car. You can't think, oh, I'm shit, and my dog was shit, and everything's shit, and I'm no good at this. You really can't afford to do that. And the one thing I always say to people you need to remember is when you're driving home in the car with that bad feeling, nobody else cares. Nobody cares what your run was like. They only care about what their run was like. So don't bother trying to explain it now. One thing I really hate is when people start making excuses. Maybe I'm guilty of it the odd time, but if I am, anybody hears me at it, feel free to pull me up on it. But don't bother with the excuses now. Just go home and try and fix what's wrong. And maybe your dog is not good enough. Maybe you need a different dog. And so you just have to decide, I heard a good one the other day on Facebook, and somebody said, if you're not changing, you're choosing to keep things the way they are. So I'm getting a bit fat now. And so I could say, I need to do something about getting fat and all. Well, I'm not doing anything about getting fat. I'm choosing to be fat. So just tell yourself the truth, Paddy. There's nothing wrong with the truth. There's nothing to be afraid of. And then at least you're not none of that misinformation and stuff, I probably went off topic a lot there, but that's what happens when you're talking to people.
No. I found that the conversations you have with yourself is fascinating. Because I find that sheepdog handling, sheepdog trialing is a hell of a lonely business, if you like. You're out in the field on your own with your dog. You have to figure the things out yourself. When you're on a trials field, you're in that field alone with that big crowd behind you, especially for someone like myself, a young handler. And probably a lot of handlers feel this. It's the nerves, it's the things. And I think when it's important to keep your head when things go wrong, because this summer I had I have a 4-year-old bitch that I trained myself, the first dog I've ever trained. And which you could probably tell if you saw her, because she doesn't go out on her out run. She confuses, she doesn't spot a sheep. So there was quite a few times that I went home sort of disappointed in myself, and I had those conversations, and I was really harsh on myself that, oh, I've screwed this up, because once she got to the sheep, she was so nice. Oh, I've screwed myself up. And my way of dealing with that was to take it to the next trial and try again, take it to the next trial and try again. But what you said there is where I went wrong. I wasn't choosing to change. I was choosing to try again. So what was happening was I was having the same results over and over. And only when I realized that when I go home and change it will be the time that actually does change. And then I had a little bit of success with it after. It's the mental battles that you have with yourself, I find that can define myself as a handler. It's how I react when I get into ruts that is the hardest part, but that'll get me through it. Because one thing I like to ask people I talk to is, I like to ask them for a piece of advice to tell sort of the audience. But I find it more important is what advice you'd give to somebody who's struggling. Because it's all, well and good, and you're full of confidence, you're high and flying, your dog's going well. And then, advice at that point is, little things you can do correctly. But sort of where I I've got sometimes people come to me with their dogs and ask, it's that sort of when you're at your lowest, dogs can get you down, dogs can get you low, you laugh and you cry with your dogs. It's a hell of a sort of emotional roller coaster. It's when you're at your lowest is when you need a hand, but that's when you're on, that's when you're alone, and that's where you don't seem to help to get advice.
Robin, let me interrupt you there for a second. So I didn't really touch on this, but I have a video on Patreon where I went to deer play. The first year I went to deer play, and we ended up in the final and all with the Bruce dogs. Great. And but before I went out to run, I had 2 dogs there. So before I went out to run my first dog, I was thinking, what am I doing here? I'm not really up to this. It wasn't the distance. I didn't mind the distance. I used that on the hill. But I was thinking, oh no, there's lots of good handlers around here. What am I doing here? And so I got a big bout of that. And I had to say, hey, Paddy, pull yourself together here. Look at that. You're brilliant. You're a superstar. Whatever. I don't know what rubbish I told myself, but whatever. To get off that other track, that was too uncomfortable. I didn't like that story I was telling myself. But so that could still happen to me. Well, it probably won't happen to me too much, but I'd been on the team and all a couple of times and all at that stage. I wasn't a dummy, but still I felt that. So when you're looking around at a trial and all, you don't know what's in anybody else's head there. You really don't. Like, you wouldn't know by looking at me. That's what I was thinking. And I certainly wouldn't let you know that unless you asked me. If you asked me, I'd tell you. But so I had that video just to put it on Patreon, just so that other people know what does be happening in Paddy's head, because we can get a little bit wrapped up in our own head. And then the other thing is that I got a real good start in it because I got tied up with that fella Norman, and so he was around 40 years and we were a fit. So I think it really, my advice to anybody is starting out, or anybody, is to tie up with somebody good. So like when I wanted to make stairs, tie up with a fella who has what I want. Tie up with a fella who knows how to make stairs I want to make and says they're easy. I'll tie up with that fella. And when it comes to dogs, I'll tie up with the fella who has the same kind of work for me, wants the same kind of dog for me. And he's saying, hey, Paddy, don't worry about your outrun was rubbish there today. We'll work on that. Don't worry about it. It's a bit tight. We'll work on that. And so you need somebody. I need somebody, because I don't fully trust my own thinking. I have to check it with somebody else. I do it now. I have a few buddies there I'll run it by, because I don't want to be telling myself a little story, especially if it's not true. At least if it's a good one, it's not too bad. But if I'm telling myself some rubbish, and so that's the thing. I think people, especially starting out, don't be trying to do it all on your own. And I see it so much. I see them out there running dogs with little faults that they could fix I can only guess, I can only assume that it's pride gets in their way from doing it. Like, that's how I got those kind of reject dogs. Bruce was a reject dog. Well, reject's probably too strong. Fellow who sold him, he said he wasn't good enough to make an international dog. And but if he had questioned his thinking, and if he had gone outside himself to look for some ways to fix, Bruce came with 3 or 4 good faults, and we fixed those. But if that guy, he could have easily fixed them. So that's why I don't just trust my own thinking. I'll go outside. I went to Norman, hung around with him. I went to Penn McNaught. I've been to Bobby DL. I have a dog that I have that's very difficult. And like, when I look around, I say, who can help me with this dog? Because it's not just, you can't ask anybody. I was going to say any Egypt, but you can't ask anybody. And Bobby was really the only one that came to mind. And so I contacted Bobby, and Bobby said, well, yeah, I'm not going to tell you over the phone or anything. So I got on the boat the next day. Like, you have to be kind of committed about this thing too. I was over with him inside a week for a couple of days, and I've been to him a few times, and he's redefined my whole concept of balance. So wouldn't I have been an awful fool not to take advantage of all his years and experience and knowledge and download a little bit of it for myself? And so he's just redefined my thing, and things that I thought were unreasonable to ask or expect of a dog, probably shown me a way. And it doesn't conflict with, I mentioned Ray Hunt earlier, and there's one other guy, Keystone, and I think is Bart Bellin, a Belgian fella. But everything Bobby said, it doesn't conflict with any of that. But what it does, he's shown me different methods and different ways to communicate it to the dog. Because really, this, for me, dog training, it's about communication. And so Bobby has shown me a new way of communicating, and it's been brilliant. And I've seen what he can do with his dogs, and I was thinking, I didn't know I could get all that out of my dog. So back to what I was saying there, wouldn't I be a real fool not to go over? But pride stops people from asking and stop. And if I win the international, I can thank Norman, I can thank Bobby DL, I can thank Penn McNaught, I can thank Alistair McRae, I can thank Serge, and I can probably thank a few more people. And it doesn't matter how many people I thank or who I give the credit to, because I'll have still won it. You see Aidan O'Brien, the horse trainer in Ireland there, and he's winning all around him. He's a genius. And anytime he gets interviewed, he says, the staff are great, and the staff are just so good, and the staff and the horse is good, and the staff are good. But he's still the one going home with the check or with the new clients or whatever, So all I'm saying there is, don't let pride get in your way. Put pride in the bin, because nobody cares about your pride.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I mentioned Aladoid before, and he lives probably 10 miles from where I live. My mum was telling me, go see Alad. And I was that fool with too much pride, thinking, no, I'll train him myself. I'll get it sorted. I'll do it myself. And it's mad when you think, I was refusing to go and talk to Alad Owen. How mad that sounds when you think it back. But it does. You do get in your own way sometimes, and it can be the downfall of us.
Let me interrupt you again. One other thing I see people getting caught up, and I don't know if pride mightn't be pride at all, but they get caught up in their own line and all. You asked me earlier where do I get my dogs and all. So, like I said, I bought some of them. They were rejects. There's me, Bruce. I'm real fond of Bruce. Bruce was, somebody else's cast off. So I don't care where they come from if they have those ingredients that I'm looking for. The first 3 are the important ones. After that, I want to see some GPS in the dog. I want a good shedder and singular, ideally, and a few more things. I want a dog that helps me to be a bit better than I am. But where they come from, I don't care if it's by my Bruce out of my gym, by my this and that. And I've had 4 generations of it. That's to me, when people get fixed into those things, I think they limit what they could have. And you see those people turn around and say, it's so hard to get a good dog. and yeah, so hard, yeah. But so I don't think it's so hard at all. And I have to thank my buddy Norman Deacon. I was telling you a story earlier, and I was saying with that Buddy Ben dog, he said, don't tell him, he'll get you in the national. And then Pat Byrne came over inquiring one day, and Norman said, sell him the Buddy dog. And it was 1,200 or something, which was a lot of money back then, and it's kind of a compliment for me. And he said, sell him. And I said, but Norman, you said we'd get in the national with this dog. He said, don't worry, we'll get another one. And so and Norman had put me into a dog early and play, a dog I thought people would shoot. I thought he was a killer, a real extreme dog. And that dog taught me a lot. But he got killed. I got him killed working cattle. But And so these dogs, so there was a dog got killed. This one Norman told me to sell him, and so I got into a way that these dogs kept coming. And so I think you have to be careful about our thinking when we start to think my lines, or so going back into my this, that, and the other. Allah does it successfully, but I see so many people, and they kind of breed themselves down into average dogs doing it. And really, if you win the Supreme in 10 years' time, Robin, and I hope you do, nobody will say, "Oh, isn't that amazing, Robin, that your dog has 4 generations?" They won't think about what way your dog is bred. They might want to just see, for using for breeding, but they don't care if your name is back on 4 generations or if my name is on it. Nobody cares. You'll have won. That's all that matters. And so I just hate to see people getting sidetracked with that rubbish, out sentimental. It's back to that kind of misinformation, telling yourself little stories and all. Like, do you want to win, or do you want a happy story? What do you want?
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So I was just wondering then, when it comes to, when you're breeding your own dogs, when you're trying to match a sort of a dog to a bitch, are you very technical at sort of looking at lines, looking at traits, or are you sort of more of is it potluck kind of man when it comes to breeding? What sort of your ideas when it comes to that?
Well, I tend to think, so the grandfather and the great grandfather or mothers, when I say he, it's out of laziness usually. I don't discriminate between dogs or bitches. But when I see those, the 3rd and 4th generation, maybe the 5th generation too, 3rd and 4th are important to me. And obviously the father and mother are important to me, or I wouldn't be looking at it probably. But I wanted, like years ago, Robin Dean had a dog called, I can't think, he was a son of Paul Turnbull's Nap, and famous dog, and he was on the team a lot back in 99, 2000, around there. And I remember thinking, I spoke to Robin about using his dog on that bitch that I later sold to Butch, so it didn't happen. But I was thinking, will I go to Paul, or will I go to Robin? Which dog should I use? Should I use the dog that got the dog I like, or, and so I was having that thing in my head. But now, really, when I breed, or if I chance a pup or whatever, because I buy a pup from you if I like the dogs. I'm not stuck on my own lines. I want to see grandparents. I want to see 3rd and 4th generations there of stuff that I like and that I know. I don't want to see brand names. I want to see stuff that that I recognize as being dogs that I like. And then I put them together, and then it's kind of a potluck. And so if I breed a litter myself and I pick a pup, it's probably the last one to sell, or it's one that's a bit funny, or it's a bit, I don't want to sell somebody else a nifty bit of a pup. I can keep that. Because if it doesn't work out, and this might sound a bit rough to people, but if it doesn't work out, I'll get another one. But I want to go back to something you asked me about there. When we're talking about the drive home in the car and being on your own and all, this is something, like, I owe a real big debt to dogs now, to be honest with you. So when I stopped drinking and all, I was a raw sort of a fella, and I had no self-esteem. I could bluff and all. I'd appear confident. I could do the confidence thing. But inside, I didn't have self-esteem. I didn't have a big value on myself. Maybe that's why I don't feel so much pride today, but I have self-esteem today. But dogs, what happened was, I started the first one of those common dogs. He was unregistered and all, a real good cattle dog. But a fella wanted to buy him off me for 1,000. Norman said, sell him because he's not good enough. And I didn't like that, but I listened to Norman and I sold him. And we got this crazy dog in his place. But I sold that dog and I got 1,000. And that time, 1,000 was a lot of money for a dog. And for me, well, it meant I was worth something. I was after selling a dog for 1,000, and so my value started to go up. And so then I started to get these good young dogs and sell them to good handlers, and they went on, and then I got on the team and all these things. And so my self-esteem started to come up, and I realized I was kind of good at something. And my value, and so I really have to thank dogs for that. And it was very naive too. Norman would be saying to me, that fella just said that to you, Paddy, because he's jealous, or he's picking holes in there because he's jealous or whatever. And Norman would see a lot of these things. And I was saying, really, Norman, do you think so? Because I wouldn't see it. And so dogs and Norman and all that, I really owe them a big debt, because I don't know if they form my character, but they certainly helped my self-esteem and helped me put a value on myself. Because up to then, I pretend I had one, but I didn't really. So it's a big debt I owe.
Yeah, so if we sort of circle back of what we talked about in the beginning, then if we asked again
Robin,
why,
circles
Yeah,
around.
so if we went back to why do you sort of train, why have you chosen to train sheepdogs? Do you think you're trying to sort of give back in your own way for the, as you said, how you feel like you owe a debt to dogs? Does it feel like you're sort of trying to give back to the sort of dog world somehow? Is that what you find rewarding, sort of training a dog, trying to help it reach its full potential as sort of a way for sort of you to give back? Is that how you see it?
Well, I do class myself as a bit of a giver, but and so I'd gladly let out sheep at a trial, but there's something in that for me too. I'll be learning a little bit at the top of the field. I'll be finding out, or maybe I'll get to know a fella a bit better up there who's helping me or whatever. So, I'll try and, I'll let out. I'm open to doing that anytime anybody asks me, and sometimes I'll offer. And then I try to judge about 3 trials a year. I judged a trial there last weekend, and I go to Switzerland this weekend, and I'm not taking a payment for it this weekend. So, that's given. And then, so I do feel like I have to contribute something back, and I'll try and put on a few trials. Actually, I tell you, I want to put on a trial that was last held in 1938 in like a big. It'd be like Central Park in Dublin, the Phoenix Park, and it was. I think it was a national, might have been Ireland's second ever national. And so I kind of like the whole. We have a fairly big event around next October. I'd like to see. I'm going to talk to the guys in the Phoenix Park and see if we can have permission for that. And there's a bit of work there, gathering up sheep, bringing them to Dublin, and I'll go looking for sponsors to pay for them, even make a few pound out of it. But I don't mind. I've done a few things there lately that have cost me money, where I'm giving something. But dogs have given me so much, I don't have to keep score there. But when I give to people, I'm not everybody's friend. So it's a little bit like the dogs. When I'm training the dog, I'll give them the sheep, but I want something in exchange. So sometimes it's kind of hard to explain, but often at clinics and all, I'm not nice to people maybe, and I'll make them work for something a bit. And like on Facebook there, I don't get that many likes when I put up stuff. But my thing is, if you want something there and you want to take it and you want to use it, I'll gladly show you as much as I can and try and help you to do that. But if you don't want to, well, it's like you can lead the horse to water. I say you lead a horse to water and you can't make him drink. But with people, you can lead the person to knowledge, but you can't make them think. It's very hard to get people to question themselves. And so that's it. I try and make stuff available. It's lovely to try and help somebody. It's like a dog when you're starting to show them something and they're trying to learn, they're trying to get the sheep, and the next thing we get this communication going, the dog goes, "Oh yeah, if I do this, you let me have the sheep." And you know what? This is not such a bad deal, Paddy. So it's a bit quid pro quo, but I'm a little bit like that with everything. I'll give first, and if I don't see anything coming back, I'll cut off the giving fairly fast.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for the sort of last hour that we've had. Really, really insightful. Would you like to tell people who are watching where they can find more of your stuff? Is there any way you'd like to sort of send people in the direction of?
Yeah, and so just like I was talking there with the last thing I was saying, I don't do a lot of selling on that Patreon thing. I say to people, you know what, it's there. You can sign up. You can sign up for a month. You might have to pay for the first month. If you don't like it after that, you can leave. If it's no good to you, I don't want your money if it's of no benefit. But it's there. So that's it. So it's like Churchman Sheepdogs. You can find it on Patreon. And so I wouldn't even put up the link for people. They can work a little bit. It's easy enough. If you want to find it, it's there. You just have to look a little bit. And so yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm on YouTube and I'm on TikTok and all that kind of stuff. And really what I do with YouTube and TikTok, and Facebook, it's to try and show people a little bit of our world. Like I love all that stuff on the hill. I'm going off now after this. I'm going to try and get 3 ewes back off the hill. They're not even my ones. I got a couple of mine yesterday. But for me, that's my golf and all. But I just love that whole world. On our hill, there's probably 7 or 8 of us there, and we all come together at different times to go gather. And then I gather on a hill across from us with a fella called Big Jim there. I give him a hand over there and his family and some of the other boys that are on that. But I just love all that camaraderie and tradition. And like on our hill, there's sheep there with a JF brand on it. But there's no JF on our hill. They're Jim Nolan's sheep, and it's his grandfather's brand. It's on the hill since 1907. So, there's all this tradition and stories and what happened here and how the sheep work and how it flows and how we deal. And every now and again we'll have bits of fights and how we get through all that and all. And To me, I just see all that stuff as I don't even have a share on the hill. They just bring me up now because I got in there with a fella who had sheep on it and he was sick. And Nicky, a real character fella, Nicky was dying, but I bought a few of his jaws and he was kind of slipping me in onto the hill through his sheep and everybody kind of knew. And in the end, then he died and everyone knew I was up there. And so I've been there ever since. But I see it as being a kind of an exclusive membership in a sort of an exclusive club. Like they don't let you in there too simple. And so I'm in on our hill and then on the one across with those boys. And I have a big value on being part of that community as well as the work. If we were going to go gathering and there was a big trial on, I'd go gathering. I'm not, trials for me is only really a way of benchmarking my dogs. If they're trained correctly, they'll do well enough at trials. If they need to be trained really correctly to work correctly on the hill, because you can do a lot of damage and a lot of harm up there if they're not right. But so this whole thing, the Patreon thing, it's about training dogs. I'm more of a trainer than a trialist, and I just love all the hill stuff and all that goes with that. And then all that. Bobby DL said a lovely phrase to me that I never forgot. And Bobby said, we want to train out our dogs to work so that we can allow them to express themselves. Now, when Bobby said that, the hair stood up on my arms. And so money can't buy that. People say, oh, Paddy's all about the money. People aren't thinking if they say that, because this thing is just anyway. So that's what I've been trying to show on social media. That's my motivation for putting stuff on social media. It's not look how good my dog is or anything. It's just to expose all that kind of stuff. And then when we train, want to try and aim for that place that Bobby L is talking about, where you can allow our dogs to express themselves. So that's it. Find me anywhere.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to end it. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.